The winter ball at Harrington Estate shimmered like a dream fashioned from crystal and candlelight, yet beneath its glittering surface pulsed the quiet cruelty of London society. Ladies in jeweled gowns drifted across the marble floor like bright petals caught in an elegant current, each one measuring her worth by the sharp glances of others. The violins rose, sweet and trembling, as though pleading with the night to overlook the heartache sewn into the seams of every gown. And then, with a hush reserved for royalty and scandal alike, the Duke of Ravensworth entered. Tall, severe, and impossibly composed, he carried the kind of presence that bent an entire room toward him without so much as a word. Fans fluttered like nervous little birds. Mothers straightened the spines of their daughters. Daughters practiced modest smiles that hid desperate hope. Every woman wanted him, whispered for him, dreamed of the life that might unfold if he so much as offered a single glance. Except one. Miss Eleanor Ashford entered the ballroom moments after the Duke, though her arrival stirred no frenzy, only murmurs that slithered through the air with thinly veiled delight. Her gown was modest ivory, lacking jewels or extravagant lace, but her posture carried a quiet defiance that made her seem far taller than she was. She was, after all, the only woman in London who had once declined the Duke's invitation to dance, an offense that society had neither forgiven nor forgotten. Tonight, it seemed they wished to make her remember it too. Eleanor had barely stepped beyond the threshold when a young woman in emerald silk approached with a smile sharpened by envy. A glass-tipped, scarlet wine blooming like blood across Eleanor's bodice. Gasping theatrically, the young woman apologized loud enough for half the ballroom to hear, turning misfortune into spectacle. Whispers swelled, soft but cutting. Poor thing. Perhaps now she'll think twice before pretending she is above him. Eleanor's cheeks warmed, but she lifted her chin with a composure that made the malice seem childish. She refused to give them the pleasure of her humiliation. But the ballroom had already scented blood. And it was then, precisely when she wished to be invisible, that the music softened, the crowd parted, and the Duke of Ravensworth turned his gaze upon her. He crossed the ballroom with steady, unhurried steps, the world bending around him as though he were the axis upon which every jeweled dream spun. The women near him tried to appear unconcerned, but their eyes shimmered with longing. Eleanor felt each step like a tightening thread around her ribs. She knew precisely what the room expected, that she would finally bow, finally soften, finally regret her past refusal. The Duke stopped before her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Miss Ashford," he murmured, his tone gentler than she remembered. "Allow me to—" Before he could finish, Eleanor stepped back, not harshly, but with unmistakable intent. A hush rippled outward, brittle and electric. His hand, extended in courtesy, hung between them like a question she refused to answer. The rejection struck the room with greater force than the wine spill. Gasps fluttered, whispers ignited like quick flame. The Duke's expression shifted only slightly, but the stillness in his eyes carried a storm held tightly at bay. Eleanor felt her breath falter, though her face remained calm. She had protected her dignity, yet something inside her quivered, fragile and unnamed. The Duke inclined his head with impeccable grace, though a shadow of something raw flickered through his composure. He stepped back, giving her space, but the distance only tightened the air between them. Around them, the ballroom swelled with renewed whispers, triumphant for some, horrified for others. Eleanor exhaled slowly, steadying herself, unaware that this single moment had altered the course of her life. For as the Duke turned away, his gaze hardened with unmistakable resolve. Not the resolve of a man rejected, but of a man who had just discovered the only battle worth fighting. And London, ever hungry for spectacle, sensed it too. The air trembled with the kind of anticipation that precedes storms and scandals alike, and Eleanor, standing in her stained gown, felt the weight of 100 eyes pressing against her back. She wished to vanish into the marble beneath her feet, to dissolve before the whispers could fasten themselves to her skin. Yet part of her, some stubborn, unyielding shard, refused to bend. She had survived London's coldest judgments before, she would survive this too. Even so, her pulse beat unsteadily, for she sensed the Duke's attention lingering behind her like a phantom touch. He had not approached her out of courtesy alone. She could feel it in the careful weight of his gaze, as though he sought answers she had no intention of giving. Around her, the violins resumed their measured sweep, the dancers gliding once more into practiced harmony, but the room felt irrevocably changed. The Duke moved through the crowd with a composure that was almost too controlled, his jaw set with a quiet oath no one else perceived. Eleanor sensed it, the shift, the spark, the silent promise of pursuit, and though she tried to extinguish the strange flutter it roused within her, she failed. For the first time in years, something unfamiliar pressed against the guarded walls of her heart. Not desire, not yet, but the dangerous awareness of being seen. She forced herself to breathe, forcing her gaze toward the chandelier where hundreds of crystals scattered trembling light, anything to avoid catching even a glimpse of the man whose presence threatened her carefully maintained solitude. But she could not escape the truth that settled like a chill along her spine. The Duke of Ravensworth, the man desired by all of London, had just been denied before its watching eyes, and such a man did not suffer defeat quietly. Eleanor sensed, with a shiver she fought to hide, that this night was only the beginning of a storm far larger than she imagined. By morning, London had already transformed the Harrington Ball into a legend retold over tea trays and carriage rides. Eleanor Ashford's refusal of the Duke, delivered with a gentleness that somehow struck harder than cruelty, became the city's newest obsession. Newspapers alluded to a young lady of unusual arrogance, while gossip salons whispered far more vicious theories. Some claimed she sought attention, others declared she was secretly engaged. A few, lowering their voices to delighted hushes, suggested the Duke had already proposed and been rejected. Eleanor walked these streets as though moving through an invisible storm, hearing her name reduced to rumor and her silence mistaken for pride. Her aunt, Mrs. Pennington, devoured every scrap of gossip with equal parts fascination and dread. "You have offended the most influential man in London," she lamented as they ate breakfast beneath the pale wash of a winter sky. "One cannot simply turn away a duke. Society has no patience for such theatrics." Eleanor stirred her tea, refusing to meet her aunt's gaze. "I declined only his appearance of entitlement," she replied softly. "Not the man." Yet she could not explain what unsettled her, for she barely understood it herself. She had no desire for the Duke's rank or favor, and yet his presence lingered like a whispered chord she could not unhear. Mrs. Pennington shook her head and muttered about ruined prospects, completely unaware that the day had already begun shifting toward something far stranger than judgment. Just before noon, a carriage bearing the Ravensworth crest stopped before their townhouse. The footman who approached the door stood as stiffly as the icicles hanging from the eaves. He presented a narrow ivory box sealed with dark blue ribbon, refusing to name the sender even though the emblem spoke loudly enough. Eleanor felt every breath in the corridor still as she untied the ribbon. Inside lay a single white camellia, its petals impossibly pristine, as though untouched by mortal hands. Nestled beneath it rested a slip of parchment with a message written in a hand unmistakably his, a flower for the only woman who sees beyond crowns. Her aunt clapped her hands in thrilled disbelief, but Eleanor felt her pulse quicken with something closer to alarm. She wanted to reject the gesture, to toss the camellia into the fire and banish the Duke's voice from her mind. Yet when she stepped toward the hearth, the flower trembled delicately in her grip, as though pleading for mercy. She could not destroy it. Instead, she returned it to the box and set it upon her writing desk, far from sight, but not far enough. Her aunt hovered nearby, delight glowing in her eyes. "This is no simple courtesy," Mrs. Pennington whispered. "This is pursuit." Eleanor steadied her breath. "It is an inconvenience at best." But the truth pressed more deeply. She feared that if she allowed the Duke's attention to settle upon her, she would lose something she had spent years fortifying, her fragile, hard-won peace. By evening, the city's rumor mills churned with renewed vigor. A shopgirl at Bloomfield's claimed to have seen the Duke's carriage racing across town. A viscountess swore Eleanor had been invited to a private supper. The truth, quiet and simple, vanished beneath the weight of London's hunger for spectacle. Eleanor attempted to escape it by visiting a small bookshop tucked between two inns, the kind of place where time softened and the world's sharp corners dissolved. But even there, scandal found her. Two ladies browsing near the poetry shelves whispered loudly enough for her to hear. "Poor Duke," one said. "Imagine choosing someone who cannot appreciate his stature." "Or worse," the other replied, "someone who thinks herself above it." Eleanor left before they could see the tremor in her hands. When she returned home, another package awaited her, this one thicker, wrapped in dark linen. Her aunt, nearly breathless with anticipation, urged her to open it at once. Eleanor hesitated, her heart thudding with a mix of dread and curiosity. She unwrapped the parcel to find a leather-bound book of poetry, its pages edged in gold. Nothing accompanied it except a single bookmark placed against one particular line. "I desire nothing but the one who refuses me." Eleanor's breath caught painfully. It was not a plea and not a command. It felt more like an admission torn from a man unaccustomed to revealing his heart. She closed the book with a snap, her hands shaking. "This must stop," she murmured. "He must understand that I want no part of this." Yet even as she spoke, the truth unraveled within her. It was not the Duke's attention she feared, but the way it made her feel, exposed, seen, and unbearably human. She had spent years mastering the art of restraint, living quietly at the edges of society where no title could wound her and no promise could break her. The Duke shattered that safety with a single flower, a single line of poetry, a single unwavering gaze. The more she tried to distance herself, the more persistently he stepped into the empty spaces she had sworn to protect. She told herself he was merely curious, that men of his rank found entertainment in resistance. But something about his tokens, subtle, thoughtful, never boastful, made that explanation ring hollow. London, meanwhile, devoured every sign of the unfolding intrigue. Gentlemen placed bets at clubs. Ladies speculated whether a proposal loomed. Some insisted Eleanor was cunning, playing a calculated game. Others called her foolish for resisting what any woman would covet. Invitations to teas and soirees declined in number, replaced by sly glances and questioning smiles. Eleanor tried to carry herself with dignity, but each whisper felt like a tug unraveling her composure thread by thread. The camellia remained on her desk, its petals still impossibly perfect days later, as though immune to decay. Eleanor resented its beauty, resented the way her eyes kept drifting toward it when she ought to have been reading or sewing or sleeping. Late one evening, as she sat beside the window watching fog thicken along the street, she heard her aunt bustling into the corridor with a flurry of excitement. "Another delivery from Ravensworth," Mrs. Pennington whispered through the door. "Surely this one carries his intentions plainly." Eleanor closed her eyes, willing her heartbeat to steady. She opened the door to accept the package, though her fingers trembled as she did. This one was small, wrapped in black paper, sealed with wax bearing the Duke's crest. Her aunt hovered expectantly, but Eleanor stepped back into her room and shut the door with unusual firmness. She set the parcel on her dressing table, staring at it as though it were something dangerous, something alive. She hesitated for a long moment before breaking the seal. But when she lifted the lid, she found nothing inside, nothing but the faintest trace of the Duke's cologne and a single folded note. The emptiness startled her. Her pulse surged as she unfolded the paper. There were only 3 words written in elegant, deliberate script. "You intrigue me." She read the words twice, then a third time, her breath catching against the fragile quiet of her room. It was a message far bolder than a flower or a poem. It was a promise. And as she stared at the empty box, she realized with a sudden chill that the Duke had stopped offering tokens. He had begun offering himself. The rain began before dusk, soft at first, then gathering into a steady silver curtain that blurred the lamps along Grosvenor Square. Eleanor watched it from her window, her fingers curled around the empty box the Duke had sent. Those 3 words, "You intrigue me," echoed through her thoughts like a pulse she could neither quiet nor reason away. She wished the rain might wash away the scandal clinging to her name, or the tension tightening around her ribs each time his image surfaced unbidden. But London's storms offered no mercy to women who resisted powerful men, and certainly none to women who tempted them. Her aunt spent the afternoon in a state of delighted agitation, convinced the Duke's pursuit would end in triumph. "He will call officially any day now," Mrs. Pennington declared as she fussed with ribbon and lace. "A man of his stature does not send such messages lightly. This is courtship in earnest." Eleanor nearly laughed at the word courtship. Nothing about this felt safe or sweet. It felt like being drawn toward a fire whose warmth she mistrusted, whose glow threatened to expose too much. She feared the Duke saw her not as a woman, but as a puzzle, a challenge to his authority, a disruption to his certainty. And yet, some part of her wondered whether challenges were the only things capable of stirring a heart like his. By nightfall, the rain deepened into thunder. Eleanor excused herself early, seeking solitude. She lit a single candle, its glow brushing gold across the room, and sat at her desk. The camellia lay in its box nearby, still impossibly whole. The sight of it made her throat tighten with something dangerously like yearning. She opened her journal to write, hoping the act might quiet her thoughts, but her hand stilled as a knock echoed through the house, firm, deliberate, unmistakably masculine. Her breath caught. No gentleman would call at this hour. No gentleman except one. Before she could rise, her aunt hurried down the hallway, whispering furiously, "At this hour? What could this possibly—" Oh! A door opened. A murmur followed. Eleanor froze. Footsteps approached, unhurried and certain. She felt the air shift, charged with an energy she recognized too well. She stood, heart pounding, as the faintest shadow appeared at her doorway. "Miss Ashford," the Duke's voice drifted in, low and composed despite the storm. "May I speak with you?" Her pulse stuttered. This was unthinkable, improper, reckless, and yet she found herself answering with a steadiness she did not feel. "You may." She stepped aside to admit him, her candle trembling in the draught. The Duke entered, rain glistening in the dark strands of his hair, his coat damp across the shoulders. He seemed carved from night itself, a figure both haunting and compelling. She could not decide whether to fear him or pity him. "I apologize for the lateness of the hour," he said, though he did not sound remotely apologetic. The matter could not wait. Eleanor clasped her hands before her to anchor herself. "Then say what you came to say, Your Grace." His eyes held hers with startling precision. "London talks of you incessantly," he began, his voice controlled but edged with frustration. "It debates your intentions, your character, your motives. You are spoken of far more than I wish you to be." A flicker of heat rose in her chest. "Then perhaps you should cease gifting me objects that invite narrative." He stepped closer, too close, and lowered his voice. "And perhaps you should stop pretending you are unaffected." The words struck her like a blow. She felt her breath falter. "You presume much," she managed. "I presume only what is plain to see," he replied. "You would not tremble if I were nothing to you." "I am not trembling." But her voice betrayed her, softening despite her will. He noticed. Of course he did. "I did not come to accuse," he continued, though his gaze softened in a way that unsettled her more than any sharpness could have. "I came because I believe you deserve truth, not rumor. And because I cannot bear that London shapes your opinion of me before I've had the chance to speak plainly." She swallowed, confused by the sudden vulnerability woven through his tone. "Speak plainly, then." "I desire your honesty," he said. "Not your approval. Not your submission. Merely your honesty." He paused, searching her face. "Why did you refuse me at the ball?" Eleanor felt the question like a hand closing around her heart. She turned away, moving toward the window where rain streaked against glass like falling stars. "Because I feared you would see me as they all do, another woman desperate for your attention." "And are you?" he asked softly. She closed her eyes. "No." His breath left him in the faintest sigh of relief. "Then why avoid me?" She hesitated, then spoke with a trembling truth she had not meant to reveal. "Because you unsettle me. You stand in a world that has only ever wounded me. And I do not trust that you understand the cost of your attention." Silence settled, heavy and fragile. When she turned back, she found something new in his expression, an ache, a quiet anguish that loosened her breath. "I understand more than you believe," he said. "I have lived under expectation so long that I no longer know where it ends and I begin. When you refused me, it was the first time someone looked at me and saw a man, not a title." Eleanor felt herself soften despite her resistance. He stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she felt the warmth of him through the storm-cooled air. "I sent no token without thought," he said. "Each one was meant only to say what I feared words could not." His voice lowered. "You are the first person who has ever made me uncertain." She drew a breath, fragile and deep. Uncertainty is not affection. No, he murmured. But it may be the beginning of something far greater. Their gazes held, suspended in a moment that seemed to quiet even the rain. Eleanor felt the room tilt, not with danger, but with possibility. She opened her mouth to speak, but the sound of hurried footsteps burst down the hallway. Her aunt's frantic voice followed. Eleanor. A messenger. There's news, terrible news about your family estate. The Duke turned sharply. Eleanor's breath broke. The candle flickered, and the world they'd begun to build in fragile whispers shattered before either could speak another word. He found her again on the terrace where the lantern light bled into the dusk, where London's hum fell away into something quiet enough that a confession might survive it. Eleanor stood with her hands braced on the stone railing, her breath unsteady, as though the night itself pressed weight upon her ribs. Benedict crossed the threshold without ceremony. He no longer cared for propriety or distance or any illusion of detachment. He had spent too many days trying to unravel her silence. Too many. She did not turn, but he saw the taut line of her shoulders shift, felt the tremor of awareness run through her. "You should be inside," she murmured, though her voice lacked conviction. "Your mother is expecting you to charm half of London." "Half of London bores me," he said quietly. "Only one person holds my attention." At that, she faced him, and the rawness in her expression stole whatever rehearsed speech he'd planned. Her eyes glimmered with something bruised, fear, longing, resignation. "Benedict, don't," she whispered. "Not tonight." "Then when?" he asked. "How long must I pretend I don't see you flinch every time I'm near? How long must I accept your absence when I know you feel the same madness I do?" Her breath hitched. For a moment, she looked as though she would deny everything. Then exhaustion softened her posture. "You are the Duke of Ashbourne. I am a woman London doesn't bother to remember unless there's scandal attached to my name. You deserve someone who fits the shape of your world." "I don't give a damn about the shape of my world," he said, stepping closer. "I care about the truth between us." The wind tugged at her hair, loosening dark strands that brushed her cheeks. She stared at him as though seeing him for the first time, or perhaps as though mourning what she believed she could never claim. "You don't understand," she said slowly. "If I let myself want you, everything I've worked to protect will fall apart." "Then tell me what you're protecting," he urged. Her hands tightened on the railing. She lowered her gaze, her voice barely audible. "My sister. My family. Our reputation hangs by a thread, Benedict. After the scandal with my father, the debts, the whispers, if anyone thinks I'm reaching above my station, everything collapses. My sister's prospects vanish. My mother's fragile health worsens. They have suffered enough humiliation. And so you'll suffer in silence for their sake," he said. It was not a question. She laughed, hollow and soft. "It's all I've ever done. But you're not alone anymore." "Don't make promises you cannot keep," she said, her voice cracking. "You are a duke. The world watches you. It rewards your impulses and punishes mine." He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Her fingers trembled when his closed around them, a small surrender that seared straight into his chest. "Let them watch," he said. "Let them talk. I will not hide what I feel." Her eyes lifted to his, wide and unguarded. "What do you feel?" He stepped closer still, until the space between them held only breath. "That every room without you is empty. That every day I'm forced to pretend indifference is another day wasted. That I have never wanted anything, anyone, with the urgency I want you." A quiet sound escaped her, half disbelief, half aching relief. She searched his face as if afraid of being fooled. "If anyone sees us," she whispered, "then they will see the truth I am no longer willing to deny." A tear slipped down her cheek. She brushed it away quickly, but he caught the movement, caught the pain that caused it. "I am afraid," she admitted, "of what I feel, of what this means, of how quickly everything could be taken. You don't have to be afraid of me." Her breath wavered, but she didn't withdraw when he cupped her cheek. The warmth of her skin beneath his palm felt like a vow he'd been waiting his entire life to make. She leaned into his touch, only slightly, but it was enough to unravel whatever restraint remained between them. "I shouldn't," she murmured. "But you want to," he said. She closed her eyes. "Yes." The word hung between them like a spark waiting for tinder. He lowered his forehead to hers. The city below blurred into an indistinct hum. She exhaled shakily, her hands rising to rest against his chest as though seeking proof he was real. He felt her heart, fast and frantic, mirroring his own. "Then let this be ours," he whispered. For a moment, it seemed she might kiss him. Her lips parted, her breath mingling with his. But then she stiffened, pulled back slightly, her gaze darting past his shoulder toward the ballroom doors. He turned. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted, motionless, watching. Not just anyone. Lady Pennington, London's most merciless purveyor of gossip. Eleanor's face drained of color. Benedict felt the world shift beneath them, the fragile safety of the terrace splintering into danger. Lady Pennington's lips curled in a slow, delighted smile before she slipped back inside. Eleanor stumbled a step away, panic igniting in her eyes. "No," she breathed. "She saw us. Benedict, she saw." He reached for her, but she recoiled as though the very air between them had become lethal. "It's over," she choked. "Everything I feared. It's already begun." "Eleanor." But she was already running, disappearing into the shadows of the corridor, leaving him with the echo of her confession and the cold certainty that the scandal she'd fought so desperately to avoid was now racing straight toward them. And as Benedict stood frozen beneath the dim lantern glow, he realized there was no path back to caution. Whatever came next, ruin, war, or revelation, would entwine their fates, forcing truths neither of them could outrun any longer. Rain had returned to London that evening, though this time it fell with a hush that seemed almost deliberate, a quiet accomplice to the culmination that awaited Eleanor. She stood beneath the iron lamps of Grosvenor Square, the gaslight trembling over her pale cheeks, each step echoing with a tension that felt heavier than any gown she had ever worn. The city around her had never seemed so oppressive, so prone to judgment. Every shadow whispered, every carriage wheel carried the weight of rumor. And yet, tonight, she was not alone. Benedict appeared as though summoned by the storm itself. His coat still damp from the rain, hair plastered slightly against his forehead, but eyes alight with the certainty that had become his compass. He approached with measured steps, not with the formal courtesy of a duke, but with the raw immediacy of a man who had fought against the world to arrive at this moment. "Eleanor," he said, voice low but unwavering, "the city will chatter until the end of time, but I will no longer hide what I feel." Her chest tightened. The truth of his words collided with her fears. "Benedict, if they see us, if they know—" "They will see only what I have long wished to reveal," he interrupted, stepping closer so that the lamplight caught the angles of his face, softened by desperation and an intimacy that London had never permitted him to show. "I do not court approval. I court only you." Eleanor's hands, which had remained rigid at her sides, lifted trembling toward his. "And what of our families? The whispers? My father's shadow." He took her hands in his, holding them as though they were sacred relics. "I care for none of it. London, society, scandal, they mean nothing. Only your heart matters to me, Eleanor. Only your choice, unbound by fear or expectation, guides what I seek." A quiet sound escaped her, half disbelief, half relief, and for a moment the world narrowed to the pulse of their breathing, the patter of rain against the stone, the lamplight dancing across their joined hands. She wanted to speak, to unburden the fragile truth she had carried for so long, yet the weight of vulnerability made her silent. Finally, she drew a shuddering breath. "I do not deserve your devotion," she murmured. "Deserve?" he echoed, incredulous. "You misunderstand entirely. You have never been asked to deserve me, only to see me for what I am. And you have. That is enough. You are enough." Her eyes brimmed with tears as she looked at him, the barricades of her caution crumbling under the force of his words. "And if I accept, if I allow this, then you will have what I have spent years searching for," he said. "A life where you will never stand alone, Never doubt that you are seen and valued for exactly who you are. The storm outside seemed to echo his words, the rain intensifying as if the heavens themselves bore witness. Eleanor's fingers curled around his, seeking the solidity of human presence against a world that had long sought to dictate her every move. She felt the tremor of her own heartbeat, fierce and unsteady, and in it, the first glimmer of courage to reclaim her desires. She stepped closer, closing the space between them until her forehead brushed against his. "Benedict, I have feared this every moment. Not you, not truly. I have feared the recklessness of wanting, the vulnerability of hope. But I cannot deny it any longer. His lips covered hers before the word could finish, soft yet insistent, a promise and a claim all at once. The kiss was brief but charged, electric enough to render the air between them almost unbearable. Eleanor's hands moved to his chest, seeking warmth, finding it, and realizing that the storm, the scandal, the endless judgments, none of it mattered when truth stood so plainly in front of her. When they parted, breaths mingling in the cool night air, Benedict's gaze held hers with a gravity that silenced even the distant echoes of London's chatter. "Speak it now," he urged gently. "Say what you have held in shadow for too long." "I choose you," she whispered, voice trembling but unwavering. "I choose us, even if the world protests." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a rare break in the Duke's otherwise composed mask. "Then let them protest. Let them speak, speculate, judge. None of it touches us. None of it defines what we have found in one another." The rain softened into a gentle patter as they stood together beneath the lamplight. The world around them diminished to the immediacy of hands clasped, foreheads touching, hearts aligned. Eleanor felt the weight of years of restraint and fear lifting, replaced by a fragile, luminous certainty. She was seen. She was chosen. She was, finally, free. A carriage rattled down the cobbled street, the sound distant but insistent, a reminder that London's gaze was never far. She pressed closer to him instinctively, finding in his presence a shield and a declaration, a promise that no whisper or rumor could ever dismantle. The city could talk. Society could judge. None of it mattered. What mattered was this, the claim of two hearts meeting, against all odds, in the quiet defiance of expectation. Benedict lifted her hand to his lips, kissing each finger with the reverence of a vow unspoken until that very moment. "Eleanor," he said softly, "this is no fleeting fancy, no capricious impulse. I have loved you through restraint and observation, through patience and longing. And I will love you still, in defiance of everything that seeks to undo us." She felt tears slide freely now, unashamed, washing away the remnants of doubt and fear. "And I will love you," she said, "not because it is safe, not because it is expected, but because it is ours. Because I have waited for this moment more than I could bear to admit." They embraced fully then, a joining of not just hands or lips, but of spirits tempered by fear, longing, and unspoken truths. Around them, the rain blurred into a curtain of silver, the lamps glowing like distant stars in a sky that had suddenly become intimate. For the first time, Eleanor felt herself untethered from the tyranny of expectation, free to inhabit a world built only by the two of them. A distant figure paused at the edge of the square, a messenger, a servant, a shadow of the gossip that never truly dies. Yet neither Eleanor nor Benedict flinched. The storm outside could rage, society could speculate, and London could murmur endlessly. None of it held sway here, in this private sanctuary of understanding, choice, and absolute devotion. He brushed wet hair from her temple, eyes lingering on hers with a gravity that promised the endurance of more than words. "We are ready," he murmured. "For everything." Eleanor rested her head against his chest, the cadence of his heartbeat steadying her own. "For everything," she echoed. The city beyond them might continue to spin with rumor, scandal, and expectation, but beneath the muted glow of gaslight, beneath the soft descent of rain, two hearts had claimed a truth that no title, no whisper, and no expectation could undo. And as the storm began to ease, a quiet clarity settled. London might never forgive her defiance, society might never understand, but in that instant, Eleanor knew she had chosen, finally, irrevocably, beautifully, the only desire that mattered. And so, under the trembling lamplight, as the first hints of dawn threatened the horizon, they stood together, not as duke and subject, not as scandal and spectator, but as two souls who had defied a city's eyes and claimed a love that even London could not command. The storm had passed, yet the exhilaration remained, a promise that even in the shadow of gossip and expectation, true hearts always found their reckoning. For Eleanor, for Benedict, the world could wait. What mattered now was the truth they had chosen, and the future they would build, one daring step at a time.